Good morning. In this video of the text analytics for a pizzeria demo, we're going to go through the necessary transformations within Power BI in order to transform the Parquet file we created in Synapse Spark Notebook into the final dataset that will be used for creating the visualizations and the end report. Before I start, let me note that being an Office Line employee who are a Microsoft Gold Partner and Partner of the Year in Greece in the last 3 years, I have to note that what I'm discussing in this series of videos do not necessarily represent the company's or Microsoft's perspectives, but are my own comments. So in the last video, we created a Parquet file in our Synapse workspace. And we can see that Parquet file by using data, linked, and in our data lake, this is the file, Sentiment Mockup Parquet. So there are many ways to import this Parquet file into Power BI. For example, we could create a table in the data lake. So to do that, we would go to the notebook we created last time and add another cell. This command here reads the Sentiment Mockup Parquet file and saves it into a table within the data lake. This command just drops the table if it already exists. And the result of running this would be to go to the workspace and create within the default data lake database this Sentiment Mockup table. And in order to import that table into Power BI, we would get data, click more, wait a little bit for some unknown reason, and then select Azure Data Lake Generation 2. Oh, sorry, that's not it. That's how you import a Parquet file. So what we do here is Synapse, Azure Synapse Analytics Workspace Beta. That's how we get the data from the data lake table, as well as an external table in the Spark SQL pool, which is the second way to do it. What I did before is a way to import the Parquet file as it is. So, selecting the Synapse workspace, we go here in the default folder, and you can see the Sentiment Mockup. This is it. You import it, and then you perform all the transformations that I'm going to show later in the video and create the dataset. And that's the way the data ready file was created. I mean the file that I have in the repo. So as I said, another way to do it is to create an external table in the SQL pool of Azure Synapse. So if you remember, this is the file. You can right-click the file, select New SQL Script, and create external table. You type schema and name of the table. Using SQL script will generate the script. I have already created that table, so there's no need to run the script again. That's the script. If you run the script, you'll get a table in the SQL database testDB, because that's what I selected, external table, DBO test. So that's an external table that, like a view in a sense, that reads the data directly from the data lake. But every time that you select data from that external table, you will be charged using the policies for the built-in, given that I have selected built-in here, SQL pool in Synapse. And the third way to import the file is to import the Parquet file itself. So if I go back to data, in the linked services, so here is the file. You can create a SQL script, select top 100 records to get this link. We don't need the stars to be copied. And then you can import in both Power BI Desktop and data flows. And I'm going to show data flows, just to show data flows as well. So you go to a workspace in Power BI Service. You click New, Data Flow, and you click Add New Tables here. And this will get you to a screen where you have to select the type of the data source as you did in the Power BI Desktop earlier. So here we're gonna select Azure Data Lake Generation 2, and you paste this link in the URL here. You don't need a gateway. You do need to sign in. And then click Next. Here you can see that the Parquet file is broken into two parts in the two different nodes of the Spark cluster. And by default, Synapse also adds a success file that you do not need to include in your transformations. And this will create a problem if you click Combine directly. So you click Transform Data here. This interface is the same as the Power Query interface in Power BI Desktop. So here you can filter out the success file and then click these two downwards arrows to combine the two parts of the Parquet file into one dataset. As you can see, the Parquet file is imported here, so we have the timestamp and it's already in a datetime format. The original text that has the customer feedback in Greek most of the time, and the translated text that we created after calling the translator cognitive service, and the sentiment that we also detected in the Synapse notebook by calling the sentiment analysis service. So from this data set, we can first of all demonstrate how to perform incremental refresh. I have to note that incremental refresh won't work in Power BI Pro data flow, you need premium capacity at least at this time of this recording. But you can perform these steps in Power BI Desktop, and at this time you will get the capability to incrementally refresh. Of course, my personal view is that the best way to incrementally refresh when you have Pro capabilities to do it in Synapse using, for example, the notebooks that we showed, or some other capability like graphical pipelines. So having said that, the way to perform incremental refresh in Power BI Pro is to create two new parameters. Range start is the first one. It should be a datetime parameter, and as it marks the beginning of the period that will be used to get the new additions in your data set, and in the first run you should ensure that you load all the data. You need to have here a date that is in the distant past. So use is this one. This one. And then you need another parameter to mark the end date. So range end. You can use date in the distant future. So after you define these two parameters, you can insert a filter in the timestamp column. In the data flow, you use a between filter. In the Power BI Desktop, you should use a custom filter. And then you select the parameters here. Start. Don't need the second equal to. And this ensures that every time the dataset is refreshed, only the new records that have a timestamp value that is newer than the latest timestamp value present in the previous time a refresh was performed to be used and effectively ensure that you have this incremental refresh. I also want to rename the table to sentiment mockup just to make sure it easily. So the second thing that I want to show here is how to call cognitive service from within a Power BI data flow or Power Query transformation. There is this nice tutorial from Microsoft where you can find all the steps as well as the code required to call the Cognitive Services API. This is M, actually not F#, but similar, I suppose. So you copy the code, go back to your data flow or Power Query in Power BI Desktop, and you add a blank query. code. So as you can see, you need your API key and your custom subdomain. And in order to find them, you go to your Cognitive Service in the Azure portal. In keys and endpoint, you copy the key, paste it here. And you also copy this subdomain, the first part of the endpoint. And replace this piece of text here. So as you can see, define the custom function, and the next step is to add a column in your dataset by invoking a custom function. And you should select the values in the translation column. To configure an anonymous authentication. And disable privacy levels. This does not work in Power BI Desktop at this time, so it wouldn't be feasible to perform this in Power BI Desktop. And by double-clicking, you rename it to key phrases. So as you can see, we have the initial comment in line 6, for example, saying that it took a long time for me to order in Greek. It's translated in English here, and the key phrase is long time, so it selects some specific phrases that represent the meaning of the text in a sense. And so the next steps to finalize our data set to create the report is to create two dimensions, the date dimension and the product dimension, and also a sales table. These things I did by typing in values like under data, and we can create the date dimension, so a date column here. Date is 4th of January 2021 in our mockup data. That is 8th of January. So that's my date dimension. Nothing very fancy, but just to do the demo. And let me rename it to date dimension. And the product dimension will have 3 products. Pizza, hamburger, and sandwich. Also, the sales data will have one record for each date and product combination, showing the revenue. So I'm having 3 columns: date, key, no. One record for pizza sales on the 4th of January. The one for pizza sales on the 5th of January. Sales in the 4th of January, and so on and so forth. So I'm going through all of these, but you can enter all mockup data that you like. That's the sales table. So going back in the sentiment mockup, I'm going to add 2 new columns to link to these 2 dimensions, the product and date dimension. In regards to creating the date key, I'm duplicating the timestamp column and transforming the new column to be a date. So I'm selecting a date format for the column. We'll only keep the dates. While for the product key, I'm going to scan the key phrases, and if I find the product name in that column, I'll set it to be the respective product. So I'm adding a conditional column here. Else it will be blank. And the last thing I want to do in this dataset is to create the sentiment score, which is also a conditional column defined by the sentiment value. So it's going to be +1 if the sentiment is positive, -1 if it's negative, and 0 if it's neutral. And that's it. Save and close. You can do the same work in Power BI Desktop under the provision that it might be difficult to call the cognitive service if you've imported the Parquet file directly at this time. This might change in the future. Let me call the data flow sentiment mockup. I've saved the data flow, and I'm also refreshing it to get data. After the data flow refreshes, we can get the data into Power BI Desktop, selecting Power BI data flows from Get Data. And we select all 4 tables. we could have deleted some of the columns to simplify things. And that's the case in the data ready file into the GitHub repo. And the last step is to actually join the fact tables with the dimension tables. So we have one-to-many relationships from the dimensions to the facts. And also ensure that the sentiment score is aggregated as average. Perhaps I forgot to change it to whole number in the data flow. You click Advanced and select Summarize by Average. And that's more or less the dataset that we'll have in the data ready Power BI file, which can be used to create all the visualizations and report we might want. Thank you very much.